Welcome again to Profiles, an original production of Channel 18, Nantucket Community Television. I'm Charlie Walters, and I'm pleased to have Joe Scarborough as my guest on today's show. He is, of course, the host of MSNBC's Morning Joe. He is also a former congressman who represented Florida's 1st District from 1995 until 2001, and he was the first Republican since Reconstruction to represent that part of the state, which is at the western end of the Florida Panhandle. During his 6 years in office, he established himself as one of the country's leading voices of conservatism. In 2011, Time magazine named him one of the 100 most influential people in the world. He is also the author of 3 books and also a recorded musician. More on that later. Thanks for coming on the show, Joe.
Great to be here.
Especially on this beautiful, bright, sunny day on Nantucket. I appreciate your being inside.
Every day's bright and sunny in Nantucket.
Good point. Let's stick with Nantucket for a minute. Why Nantucket and not any other place for a summer vacation?
You know, we came here the first time in 2004. It's back when NBC, Bob Wright and NBC Universal would have a film festival here. And we were invited in 2004, so we came up here. And about 5 minutes after I got off the plane, they knew I was going to be coming back here a lot, and we've come back every summer since then. Usually the family comes up for the month of July, and I bounce back and forth. But starting several years ago, I said, hey, wait a second, why don't I do the show from Nantucket? Got a lot of raised eyebrows at 30 Rock and in New York, but we did it. It rated well, so my commute went from being an hour in the morning to being about 4 or 5 minutes in a Jeep with a top up.
You can't beat that.
Yeah, no, it gets no better than that.
Talking about Morning Joe, you have a big anniversary coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
Well, we have a 10th anniversary coming up in September. We're going to celebrate being on the air for 10 years, and we're extraordinarily lucky we get to do the show we get to do. And we've been talking about it over the past week or two because things come at us so quickly that Willie, Meek, and I sat down and talked to each other and said, don't think there's ever been another news show that had 3 hosts that stayed on it for 10 years and a show that's actually doing better as far as ratings go than it ever has over the past decade. And some people would say is more influential than it's ever been before. So we're going to have a great 10-year anniversary. We don't know what the 11th year is going to look like, but at least the 10th is going to be pretty good.
Well, your people sent me some facts and figures, some of which you've alluded to, but Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski, who is your fiancée. Congratulations on your engagement.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
And Willie Geist are currently the longest-running co-hosting team on cable morning television.
I think we may be the longest running co-hosting team in news history. We haven't been able to figure out 3 people that have worked together for a decade. It's a pretty volatile industry. We never expected to be around for a decade. Certainly didn't expect all 3 of us to be working together for a decade, but it's worked out well, and we're happier now than we've ever been.
And as you say, your ratings are at an all-time high after 10 years.
You can't beat that.
No,
right?
You can't. No, you can't.
You know, there have been several times where I have said to Mika and Willie, you know what, we need to get out while the getting out's good. These things only last so long.
Well, that would raise hell at 30 Rock.
Yeah, it certainly would. So the fact that we're 10 years in and the ratings are higher than they've ever been really is a surprise to us as much as anybody. But again, we're lucky, we're blessed, we'll take it.
Well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, the show begins at 6 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. Mm-hmm. What time do you get up?
When I'm in New York or Connecticut, where I live in Connecticut, I usually wake up at 4 o'clock, commute in, get ready for the show. When I'm doing the show from Nantucket, I usually wake up if it starts at 6, usually wake up at about 5:45, which is another reason I love Nantucket. I love, I not only love the island and love the people, but the commute time is much shorter.
Yes, it is compared to almost anywhere.
Right.
Now, when the show ends in the Eastern time zone, it's 9 o'clock.
Right.
But the Western time zone obviously is not watching from 3 in the morning until 6. Mm-hmm. So how does that work? Are you still working in the studio after 9 o'clock Eastern?
No.
Or how does that work?
No, it's just because of how cable runs. They run the show on the West Coast from 3 to 6. We have a lot of people who are, as Willie said, either have trouble sleeping or have alcohol problems or drug problems, that watches from 3 to 6 in the morning. But I think seriously, most people will actually TiVo the show and then watch it later in the day. So, but we the first time we went out and did a book event out in California, I kept saying to Mika, why are we doing a book event in Los Angeles? Nobody's going to know who we are. And surprisingly, it was one of our larger book events, and there were people that actually watched the show live, insomniacs, but there were also a lot of other people that recorded it. So, yeah, it's kind of crazy.
You've had an eventful summer. First, there were insulting tweets from the White House. We don't need to go into that in great depth. But putting aside the content of the tweets, I'm wondering, what was it like to go from covering the news and commenting on the news to being the news?
We don't like it. It's something we had to deal with last year as well. We had known Donald Trump for over a decade. So when he started running for president, he came on our show a good bit in 2015. And we started growing critical of his policies at the end of 2015. And it certainly caused friction between us. And so throughout most of the election in 2016, throughout most of that year, we were being very critical of him, and he was returning fire. And last summer, he was attacking Mika and attacking me. We tried to keep our heads down and keep reporting on the news. And I think most importantly for us, at least over the last month or so since his attacks on Mika, we've been over backwards trying not to be personal, trying to report the news, trying to keep our heads down, and trying to keep the personal out of it.
In July, you announced on Stephen Colbert's show that you were no longer going to be a Republican.
Right.
As one of the most prominent Republicans in the country for a couple of decades, this was a big deal. What were the thought processes that you went through before you made that decision?
I became a Republican back when I was getting out of high school, and became a Republican when the Democratic Party was just a mess. It was at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. Jimmy Carter was president. There was an Iranian hostage crisis. Inflation was 20, our interest rates 21%. The economy seemed to be a wreck, and it seemed like Democrats couldn't manage things effectively. Became a Republican. And unfortunately, over the past 10, 15 years, it's been my party that's seemed to mismanage just about everything. You look at foreign policy, we've been engaged in military adventurism. What happened in Iraq and afterwards was a complete wreck. And you look at the economy, too. I'm a big deficit hawk. I'm concerned about entitlements. I'm concerned about the fact that we're heading towards bankruptcy, much the same way that Illinois is facing bankruptcy, that Connecticut, my home state, is facing an unfunded mandate problem. And Republicans took a bad situation and made it worse. When I left Congress in 2001, we had a $155 billion surplus. At the end of George W. Bush's 8 years, Republicans had run up $1 trillion deficit. The national debt had doubled from $5.6 trillion to about $12 trillion. And you look at Donald Trump's budgets, the projections. We're going to move from having a $20 trillion national debt to a $30 trillion national debt. And they're doing the same thing that Republicans did under George W. Bush. And that is talking about raising spending, cutting taxes, raising spending more money on the military. The numbers just don't add up, and not touching entitlements, not reforming Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid to save them. They're just talking about slashing Medicaid funding for more tax cuts. That's just not a fiscally responsible thing to do. So I get tired of apologizing for my party, apologizing for some of the crazy things that people were saying on the extremes of the party, tired of apologizing for a party that obviously knows something is wrong when it comes to Donald Trump and Russia, that it seemed to be obstructing the investigation, allowing Donald Trump to do whatever he wants to do. So it's much easier to be an independent, and and not have people say, well, why are you always criticizing your own party? It makes me really more of a free agent and allows me to speak my mind without people coming up to me all the time saying, hey, stop attacking your own party.
Is it fair to say, based on what you've just said, that you haven't changed, but your former party has changed?
It's very fair to say that. I'm still a small government conservative. It's funny, when I first ran in 1994, I ran along with Jeb Bush, who was running for governor that year. And both in my editorials in Northwest Florida, the papers were attacking me for being an extremist. And they were attacking Jeb Bush across the state for being an extremist. Look at both of us now, 23 years later, and the attacks within our own party suggest that we're too moderate. Well, Jeb Bush hasn't changed his views on government. I haven't changed my views on government, but the party has become far more extreme.
Well, when you were elected, it was with overwhelming majorities. And
right.
The last time you ran, you had no opposition. You got 100% of the vote.
Right. That I have found running unopposed beats running opposed every single time. Every single time. And, it's interesting, back when I was running, my constituents didn't mind if I went after Newt Gingrich, went after my own party. At the same time, I was going after Bill Clinton. And that's the thing I think a lot of Republicans right now are missing. In fact, a lot of them are missing, that people don't mind if you're critical of leaders in your own party, so long as you go to town hall meetings and explain why. I would always say Newt Gingrich is saying things that are hurting our party. He's being reckless on other policies, but when he's conservative, I'll vote with him. I'll work with him. I'll help him. That's the same thing people should be saying about Donald Trump. He shouldn't be tweeting. I think he's reckless. I think he says reckless things. I'm concerned about his relationship with Vladimir Putin and Russia. But when he promotes policies that will help my constituents, I'll vote with him. And if they say that, I think most people, even the Republican base, would respect that.
As we're taping this show, it's been less than 24 hours since the fire and fury remarks. Your thoughts?
It's just dangerous. It's extraordinarily dangerous. It's the opposite of what Teddy Roosevelt said when he said, speak softly and carry a big stick. Donald Trump has always spoken loudly and often has not had facts to back up a lot of his more extravagant claims. He's setting himself up, actually, to make the same mistake Barack Obama made in Syria, where Barack Obama drew the red line in Syria. Syria crossed that red line, and then there was nothing he could do about it. So President Obama not only undercut his credibility, he undercut the credibility of the United States in making that statement about the red line. Donald Trump is setting himself up for that as well. Are we really going to get engaged in a war that could end up killing 500,000 people on the Korean Peninsula? I don't think so.
Let's go back to the GOP for a second. What have your former colleagues thought of your switch to being an independent?
It's funny. If it had happened 5 years ago, I'm sure I would have gotten a lot of blowback. Mainly, they called me up laughing, going, oh, okay, so you're going to leave it up to us to take care of this mess. I said, yes, I am. It's not been, I just haven't received really hostile reaction whatsoever. Of course, there are always going to be people on the far right. The extremes are the sort of alt-right nationalists that'll be critical, but they'd be critical of me if I were a Republican, an independent, or a Democrat. So it's mainly been positive, even from my Republican friends,
including your constituents, your former constituents.
Yeah, I think my former constituents are a little more pro-Trump than I am. So they're still, Donald Trump still is still extremely popular in Northwest Florida, across Alabama, parts of the Deep South where I grew up. Listen, I've been through this before. It was the same thing with George W. Bush. When I started criticizing George W. Bush in 2004 for his spending habits, for his deficit spending, for his Wilsonian foreign policy, I had a lot of Republicans saying that I was being disloyal, and how could you do that? How could you be a traitor to the party and the cause? By the time George W. Bush got out of power, they were saying the same things that I was saying 4 years before, which is, and they're saying we can never do this again. We can never allow the Republican Party to be as reckless with people's money again. I said, well, we'll see. And I did see. We got in power again. The same thing happened. They're spending money like it's going out of style. We're going to explode the deficit. We're going to explode the national debt. And right now, Republicans are doing nothing, as well as Democrats, to make sure that Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid are still around for the next generation. So I've been through it before. Been there, done that. Doesn't concern me because they're going to be saying the same things about Donald Trump when he gets out of power that I'm saying about him now.
Well, for the Democrats, this would appear to be a golden opportunity for them to make a lot of gains in the 2018 midterms. Mm-hmm. But do you see any progress in that direction?
Boy, I don't. And if I'm a Democrat, and a lot of my Democratic friends in Mika are very concerned right now that the Democratic Party still can't figure out what it wants to be when it grows up. They have to have an alternative to Trumpism. And right now, just attacking Donald Trump on Russia is not going to do the trick. They've got to figure out, how do you get people back to work? And the states, especially that helped Donald Trump be elected president, in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, well, not Minnesota, but he almost won Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio. And right now, the Democrats just don't have a message for working class Americans. Hillary Clinton won working class white Americans, but she didn't win it by the margin that she needed to win it to carry those states. And this is something that Bill Clinton, Ed Rendell, the former governor of Pennsylvania, Joe Biden were warning Democrats and warning the Clinton campaign about last July and August. It seems to me the Democrats still don't have an answer to what working class Americans' question has to be, which is, what are you going to do for us that are going to, that's going to get us back to work, that's going to get us good wages, it's going to allow us to be in a better position than we would be under Republicans and Donald Trump. Right now, they don't have that answer. There's just this massive cultural divide between the parties.
There isn't really a leader of the party at this point, but if you were head of the RNC, the Republican National Committee, what Democrat would you be most happy to see go away? Or is there one?
Right now, there's not really one. If Bernie Sanders, right now, it looks like Bernie Sanders has the most energy behind him. Elizabeth Warren has the most energy behind her. Kamala Harris in California, a lot of people are talking about her. But again, look, you're talking about, again, a Democratic Party that's confined to the coasts. A Democratic Party that got 50% of their votes from, I think, like 94 counties. They have completely isolated themselves on the East Coast and the West Coast. They're not a national party anymore. In the same way that the Republican Party over time isolated itself as a Southern party. I remember looking at the map back in 2008 after Barack Obama got elected. Not a single person in New England was represented by a Republican in Congress. There wasn't a member of the House or a member of the Senate that was a Republican. And the reason why is because the Republican Party had become the party of George W. Bush, Karl Rove, Newt Gingrich, Tom DeLay. It was a Southern-centric party from Georgia all the way over to Texas. And there was no reason for people in the Midwest or New England to feel any connection with this party. It had stopped becoming a national party. The Democrats right now have that concern. They need to listen to people like Joe Manchin, who's fighting for his political life in West Virginia, figure out how he wins. How does Claire McCaskill win in Missouri? And they need to find a candidate from middle America that, like Bill Clinton in 1992, that'll help them win in areas where they don't usually win.
As I said at the top, you've written 3 books, and they've come out at 4-year intervals beginning in 2005. Mm-hmm. But in 2017, there won't be a book, I assume, correct?
I hope not. I've got a couple people wanting me to write books. It's hard business, especially when you wake up at 4 and you do a show. I've had some people approach me about writing a book about becoming an independent. But hopefully I can push that off for a year or so.
But what you did do in 2017 is put out a 5-song EP of your music.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Well, it's interesting. People have known me in my adult life as a congressman, a lawyer. I've been a football coach, obviously been a TV host. But I've been playing music since I was 5. I've been writing songs since I was 13 or 14. That's actually been the one constant through my life. And a couple of years ago, Mika and I were talking. She said, you really need to get your music out. You've written 400 songs. You've recorded 50. You really need to start getting your music out. And we talked about it, and I said, well, yeah, I could do that, but if I get it out, they're going to kill us. I'm a 50-something-year-old guy. I'm a Republican.
Well, you were a Republican.
I were, but at the time I was doing this, I said, I'm a TV talk show host. This isn't exactly the things that rock and roll dreams are made of. I said, I'll get killed. And she said, you will get killed, but you need to do it.
Well, if rock and roll is about rebellion, this is a good example.
There you
right?
go. Exactly. So I went ahead and did it, and I've been very surprised. It's worked out much, much better than I expected.
Well, this is called Mystified. Mm-hmm. And is this download only? Do I have that correct?
It is download on Spotify, Apple, Amazon. And it's how I'm starting it. I think a couple months from now, I'm going to start doing CDs. They think they've had a lot of requests for CDs, and so we'll get there. But I'm going to actually be doing an EP a month.
An EP a month?
An EP a month. It's a very busy, hectic schedule. The next one gets released August the 18th, and then I've got one released at the end of September, and I'm going to keep rolling them out every month. So it keeps me very busy.
The cover, and I guess I need to say the virtual cover,
right?
Since you can't buy it in a store at this point, is by Peter Max,
right?
Who has been around for upwards of 50 years. Nice to know he's still working.
Yeah, still working. And we actually, there's a link to Nantucket with that. Mika and I had come up here a year or so ago and got pictures taken. Did a photo session in Nantucket for the show, and Peter Max saw one of the pictures of us walking, and actually used that picture without us knowing it, and painted a portrait of us, a Peter Max portrait here, and presented it to us on the show, which we were blown away because, of course, Peter Max, obviously one of the great iconic painters, and so we thought, he did this before with our Nantucket shot. Why don't we see if we can do the cover of the EP? And he fortunately agreed to do it.
And there you are with a white Fender Jazzmaster guitar, one of the great guitars.
One of the great guitars.
No other guitar sounds quite like it.
Right. It's also good for me because it's longer. I usually I've been playing Telecasters my whole life.
That's what I have.
And I love the sound of Tellies, and it's a great American sound, especially through a Fender amp. But when I play those things live on live on stage, they're like about this long. So I actually got a Jazzmaster, which I love the sound of the Jazzmaster, and also it sort of fits me better on stage.
One more question. Are you really through with politics?
I don't know. You never know. Right now, I would much prefer to play music, do TV and play music the rest of my life and come up to Nantucket and visit up here. But you never know what's going to happen. I didn't expect to run for Congress when I was 29, but felt the calling to do it and did it. And I'm glad I did. A lot of people think, they say, what was it like serving in Congress? And they expect me to denigrate it. And I always say it's the best job I ever had. It was the most fulfilling job I ever had. And I loved every second of it. So who knows? We'll see.
Joe Scarborough, thank you for taking the time out to come on the show. And the bright sunny day is waiting out there for you.
All right. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it.
You've been watching Profiles, an original production of Nantucket Community Television, Channel 18.